Lembit, thanks for joining us. You're looking wonderful.
Feel good. I've got a use for that spike, though, for one or two people, but I'll not go any further.
Now, the proximate reason for my inviting you this evening was to talk about Partygate because, well, how shall I put this? You like a party yourself. Were you shocked to learn that Downing Street had become a kind of, well, I was going to say bordello, but there's no evidence of that. But it's become a kind of, well, party. Were you shocked?
Nothing could have surprised me less, George. The only thing that really surprised me was the fact it took so long for people to find out. The rumours were going around, you must have heard them as well, that all these things were taking place. But then he made a big mistake, didn't he, Boris Johnson? He got rid of the man who knew where all the skeletons were buried, not just Oliver Cromwell. So when you cross Dominic Cummings, who arguably he shouldn't have employed in the first place, you're going to get your comeuppance. Now, it's never been proved that Dominic Cummings is behind these revelations, but I don't think you have to be a genius to work out what might be the motivation.
Well, he did leave with a cardboard box. And I remember thinking to myself when I saw that picture, I bet there's lots of evidence in that cardboard box.
He just had to know that a few little USB sticks and maybe a few photographs, as we've now found out, might possibly have found their way into the media from a disgruntled former employee by way of Cummings. Now, let's remember that Boris was warned about Dominic Cummings long before, certainly informally, but he chose to go that path. And even that wasn't necessarily the killer fact here. The fact is that he actually conducted all of these activities, knowing that potentially there could be a spy in the camp. Let's face it, there were 30 or 40 people in his garden. How would he think that this
I think that's the bull point, really, Lembit. That's just stupidity. I mean, in this day and age, you can't do, people like you and I, kind of semi-retired from public life, even we wouldn't do certain things in big enough company with people that we couldn't be sure of, that they're not taking pictures or recording with their phones I mean, how it didn't occur in the depth of the first COVID lockdown, us having a jamboree here in the garden of Downing Street might be leaked.
Yeah, you're so right. Three huge unforced errors by Boris Johnson. The first one is to make what I thought were actually quite impressive speeches, quite statesman-like speeches at the time, but at the very same time be violating the rules he was telling us to follow. Second error, and I didn't realise how big this was at the time, is to legislate. Everyone has broken the rules with the best of intent. You just couldn't help doing it sometimes. But he did it in this way. He should have said to the country, I'm not going to bring the law in, let's do this together. And then, of course, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party was too dumb to take that line themselves. I very much agree with what you said, by the way, about him, albeit potentially in jest. And then there's this third point. The third point is that Boris thought he could get away with it. There might have been a way out if he hadn't shown that level of self-assurance. But those three things together, I think, mean that it's double fault, to use a tennis term, and he has to take the hit.
Well, it's this week, I presume, we'll see 50 Shades of Grey, Sue Gray. Is he going to get a lashing, or will he get off lightly?
Well, if he doesn't get a lashing from Sue Gray, my personal view is Sue Gray therefore undermines her own credibility. Because in the court of public opinion, Boris is already guilty. And the unfunny part about this is, with 150,000 dead people, or we can argue about the figures, but certainly many thousands of dead people, most of us know someone who died from COVID. And a lot of people couldn't even have a proper funeral. My former agent, Terry Mills, died of COVID, and we couldn't go to his funeral. And other people couldn't have their weddings and everything else cancelled. Boris just carried on regardless. And if Sue Gray really accepts that all you have to do to fool the Prime Minister into thinking a party's a meeting is wear a tie and turn up with all the booze in a suitcase, in that case, perhaps even if he was to get off lightly here, he wouldn't really have the common sense to govern. So I think that Sue Gray's just got to say, come on the balance of probability, he's guilty, but we'll find out. The one really interesting thing here is, George, you were just talking about Ukraine. He's trying to look like a statesman now, but it's a bit late, Boris. You should have been doing that beforehand, rather than just saying, oh, look over there, and let's hope that the Partygate thing goes away.
Although there is the potential get out of the police activity. Cressida Dick, the head of the Metropolitan Police, although it's all very incestuous, isn't it? Cressida Dick is the head of the Metropolitan Police, and she's appointed her wife to lead the investigation. And as many people believe, that she should have been forced to resign for actually, I believe she should never have been appointed, but she's faced calls for her own resignation, but Boris has loyally stood by her. Many people think she's repaying the favour, and she's appointed her wife to do the investigation.
It does seem to me that something absolutely smells dodgy here, because what on earth was the rationale for saying, oh, well, Sue Gray can't publish her report because the police are doing an investigation? Are we expecting a jury trial? Because there's no other reason for doing that. They wouldn't have done it for anybody else. Why didn't they take this approach when Matt Hancock was caught rather red-handed? Why did Boris then say it was right for Matt Hancock to resign? So we've got this total contradiction. And I think that it's been a terrible error there. And perhaps it's because of the repaid favours, I don't know. But the two things are completely separate. You've got the Sue Gray report, you've got the police investigation. And if Sue Gray doesn't report this week, he might think this is going to disappear. But here's the problem. If he's lied, he's broken the ministerial code. And he said last Wednesday, well, it applies to him as well. So if he lied, he has to go. It's simple. There's no debate. He has to hand the resignation into himself.
If it's concluded that he lied, I'm not sure that she will so conclude. And the police investigation is into something that you get a fixed penalty notice for. It's not even a criminal conviction. It's like getting a traffic ticket. You pay it, and it's then wiped. So how that can hold up an investigation in Whitehall is very difficult to understand.
As I recall, Boris actually got an order against him for not paying council tax. It's a CCJ, I think, county court judgment against him. He didn't resign. He's still got to be prime minister. So it's really strange. But you know what? This is a classic Al Capone moment. Al Capone being done for tax evasion when they all thought he'd done a lot more. Boris is being done, if he is found guilty, or if Sue Gray reports, as I suspect she will, that something's gone wrong in Downing Street, that possibly turning up with his wife and kid when there were 40 people in his garden might have given the clue he thought he was at the party. If he comes to that conclusion, as most of the British population has, then he's got himself into this mess because it looks like he wasn't straight. You know, George, the only reason I think he's still in his post is because Keir Starmer has done an absolutely abysmal job of holding him to account. Every Wednesday I watch PMQs expecting Keir Starmer to do the obvious thing, asking 5 tight questions and maybe a 6th one. But instead he just blows it every time. There's no one even in the penalty area, and he's missing the goal. So he's got Cressida Dick, who's shilly-shallying maybe around this, or maybe she is doing a great job, we'll see. We've got Sue Gray, who's postponing, and we've got a leader of the opposition who just can't kick the ball into the gate.
He can't kick the ball into the net. He can't land a blow. And we were always told that he was boring but forensic. But if he's forensic, how come Boris Johnson is still standing?
Because he's not forensic. It's hard to believe that he's the leader of the opposition and they replaced somebody who, whether you liked him or not, Jeremy Corbyn, was absolutely clear in his narrative. You could dislike his narrative, but you'd understand it. Tony Blair may have made some catastrophic mistakes in terms of his own long-term legacy. But you know what? Boris would have already been toast by now. Boris would have had to resign because Tony Blair would have just done the sucker punch and that would have been the end of it. But Keir Starmer can't do it. I actually thought last week, oh, he's going to do it now because he's asking short, tight questions. Does the ministerial code apply to you? Yes, no questions like that. And he could have given Boris enough rope to hang himself, but no, then he just drifted off again. So
yeah, it was particularly poor last Wednesday. Running out of time, Lembit. So let me ask, it's not just that Keir Starmer is so patently incapable of leading the opposition, knocking out the government. It's that the government is bereft of challengers with any credibility. Isn't that also the case? Tories are holding back because they look at that front bench and they can't really see anyone that can win parliamentary seats for the Conservative Party in Bolsover, in County Durham, in Rotherham, etc., where Boris did win them.
Yeah, some truth in that. I actually think the stalking horses and the serious contenders are all keeping quiet because that's what they do in these leadership elections. Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, clearly regarded as favourites. Penny Mordaunt may be there, a runner as well. They don't want to stick their head above the parapet. But the point you make is the big problem here. Boris was only in this position because he was an election winner, and he proved that. There's a big problem for him in May because if on the first Thursday of May he's still in charge, it's quite possible they'll crash and burn in the local elections. Can somebody else do better? Probably. Privately, the word on the street with council candidates is they want him to go out of the way because he's an embarrassment. But who knows? Maybe he's the great Houdini. I doubt it. I would say the absolute longest he's going to be in post before he announces his departure is the first Friday of May. But I don't think he's going to get past the Sue Gray report. I think he'll basically have to say, I'm going to leave and there needs to be a leadership election. So they'll be quiet until the gates are open and the horse race begins. But as far as I'm concerned, unfortunately for Boris, who's a friend, but he's toast.
David Cameron, perhaps rather riskily, said that Boris Johnson escapes from trouble like a greased piglet. It was an unfortunate metaphor for Mr. Cameron because we later heard stories about him and piglets when they grow up. But he does have a Houdini-like quality to him, doesn't he?
That's true. If Boris Johnson makes it back or makes it through, it's the biggest comeback since Winston Churchill. Because I've never known anyone go this deep in and dig themselves out again. But maybe he will make electoral, or maybe he'll make political history. But he's still got the big problem. This is where we started, George. The Court of Public Opinion says, you didn't let me bury my mother as I wanted to, but you were having parties in your own backyard, literally. And all the other parties too. Now, it wasn't all of them. But you know what? There are more parties to come out, I believe. And how much more will the public stand? Eventually, I think David Davis has been the one true contender in terms of saying it like it is from the back bench when he said it's time to go. But we'll see what happens. I'll be the first to come on air and say I was completely wrong. Boris is going to go on and on. I just don't see it. Now's the time to put your money, but the odds are short.
Lembit Obick, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.